So, thank you. Yes, I'm going to talk about APIs. And first of all, how many people in here know what an API is? Excellent. I will spend much less time on that slide. It's very good to know. So this is me. I run the Difference Engine. That's the Twitter handle to use if you want to complain. Sorry, here we are. Now I know which slide I'm on. So I come from the world of advertising originally, which if you've ever seen an episode of Mad Men, especially the one with the John Deere tractor, you know can be a quite bloody business. But it is also a business that has undergone several sort of revolutions. And the first one, at least in the United States, to be fully recognized was sort of the creative revolution of the 1960s. The lemon ad for Volkswagen emphasized that, or rather exemplifies it. Others, like the work here on the right by Howard Gossage and this work also by DDB at the time, were really about differentiation and sort of standing out, doing something different. Prior to that point, advertising was mostly salesmanship. It was persuasion-based. It was feature-based. It told you why you should buy something. It was quite rational for the most part. So that was Revolution 1. Revolution 2 came about in the 80s, more or less, late 80s, early 90s. This was where we started thinking about advertising as a way to create movements. It was also a way to sort of harness culture and ride the wave. Wieden & Kennedy, Goodby Silverstein, some other great advertising agencies in the US, BBH in the UK were a big sort of part of that wave. And so you got some really brilliant advertising that really started to kind of inform the culture as well as reflect it. So that was a great moment too. But now we're in sort of version 3. And version 3 of the revolution is frankly a little disappointing. It's mostly this kind of, the technology is the creative idea. It hasn't actually leveraged technology in really interesting ways yet, but it has employed technology. So you have some of these ideas like the robot printer for marathons that Nike did a couple of years ago. Some Cannes Lion winners this year include you can tweet a pizza emoji to Domino's Pizza, and sometime in the next 3 hours, they will deliver it to you. It's not a fast system. It's not a terribly efficient system, but it is a system. Another one was SoundCloud built a commemoration of the fall of the Berlin Wall, where they built a soundtrack that reflected the sounds of the Berlin Wall and then also made it look like the Berlin Wall. So that's interesting, but it's not terribly useful. I mean, certainly emotionally evocative, and some of these others are kind of fun. They're playing with technology, but they haven't done much yet. And the truth is, most of the time, we're stuck in this phase, which is about user-generated content, otherwise known as contests, and that is what passes for participation. So there have been a couple of campaigns involving links or Axe, as it's known in the US, and then the Ford Fiesta, a variety of others. There was one very famously about 7 years ago, I think, where Ford or Chevy invited people to make videos. They then made videos talking about how Ford and Chevy are very bad for the environment. So it didn't really work out the way the brand intended. And the problem is that these kinds of participatory brand activations are really designed to extract value from a passive audience or a previously passive audience, rather than creating or co-creating value with them as your customers. So they're not even necessarily people who buy Ford Fiestas or wear Lynx body spray. They're just people who like participating in contests, which doesn't do a whole lot for the business and very little in the end for the brand. So some people have been, over the last several years, complaining about this. Mel Exon, one of the co-founders of BBH Labs, said at a South by Southwest several years ago, and I have loved it ever since, you need to add value to people's lives, not just expect them to participate because you goddamn well asked them to. This is not enough. And so if you're going to start thinking about adding value, behaving like an entrepreneur, doing interesting things so that interesting things will happen to you, what does that ultimately mean? And Gareth Kay, who is no longer at Goodby, but started thinking a lot about this, started talking about the idea of making communications products as opposed to just communicating about products, which was an interesting provocation, and he had a few cool ideas about ways we could get to better ideas, asking better questions like what's the real problem, for whom, how do we actually solve it? and then what keeps the conversation going. But in the end, these are also still just about messages, not really about utility. And as somebody who never really fit in very well in advertising, utility is the thing that I kind of like best. But in the meantime, the world of advertising has certainly co-opted the world of, or at least the language of startups. So lots of conversation about should agencies start thinking like startups or software companies. Maybe we should apply agile software development theories to creativity and ad development. Maybe we should start applying it to the way we do strategy and start implementing agile and lean methodologies there. And I have also been a perpetrator of some of those ideas. But the reason that advertising agencies and brand marketers don't act like startups is that they're busy acting like huge software companies, right? They don't act like small software companies. They act like ones that go through a product development cycle that looks about like this, which is that the customer explained the problem this way, and you went through all of these different iterations, and you wound up here or here or here, but what they actually wanted was that. And because you never really got to understand the problem particularly well, and you weren't really set up to solve it anyway, you end up doing all this other shit. So this is fundamentally why we don't act with agility or in keeping with lean principles or like a startup. We're just not built for it fundamentally. So even if you're well-intentioned, you end up doing something like this. I helped create this several years ago when I was at Digitas for Samsung. It was the smart living room was the idea. Believe it or not, the underlying strategy was that your television would be the center of your digital life. But I'm pretty sure that no one in here has brought their TV with them. So probably not. But in any case, we had this lovely idea that we were going to build this experience, and the creative teams were having great ideas about, well, I know, so we'll get people to invite other people over to have a viewing party on their beautiful Samsung television, and we'll figure out what kind of movie they should watch by, they'll answer a quiz, and then we'll recommend a movie. But how are we going to do that? Because that sounds hard, and we're not coders, and we don't build things like that. So I very helpfully said, well, we could use the hunch algorithm, which is an API, actually, that allows you to answer a bunch of seemingly unrelated questions. Do you believe in aliens? Aisle or window? Coke or Pepsi? City or country? Beach or mountains? And then all of a sudden they can tell you that your favorite movie is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's actually kind of uncanny how good this particular API is. And for a very low price per server call, we could go ahead and use their quiz. We didn't have to make up a fake one. So that saved us some time. The good news was Hunch was plugged into the IMDb database. So once it asked you these questions and you answered them, it could pull up movies from the IMDb database that you probably liked and make those recommendations, and then we could use the Facebook Connect and Event API in order to create that invite a friend to go watch a movie at your house with the TV you haven't bought yet because it just launched and we're advertising it to you. The logic did not actually flow, but that's okay. So, but there were other things here too, like we could use the YouTube API to host the videos that were the demos of the product, and we could use the Google Maps API to help you find a retailer in order to go buy this beautiful TV. And that was fine as far as it went. Another project that happened at Digitas at the same time was the Wilderness Downtown with Arcade Fire, where they used Chrome and the Google Maps API to create a video that guaranteed you would cry at the end, because it would basically take your childhood home and map it against this song. You are the person running, trying to get home again. I swear to God, go find this thing, enter in your zip code. You will cry at the end. You'll thank me later. So these ideas are not so bad, right? They're pretty clever implementations of other people's software and interesting algorithms and databases. And so it's not awful. But the problem is that these are still just campaigns. And almost by definition, a campaign is taken offline. That smart living room no longer exists. That image, in fact, which I pulled down 6 months after the campaign, I had to go to the Singapore hosting site in order to find it because it had been sunsetted everywhere else in the world. Campaigns last 6 to 8 weeks, maybe 12 if you're lucky, and then they are done, even in the digital world. So these things tend to evaporate as soon as they actually start to get some traction. So while they're campaigns, they do use APIs, and that's fundamentally what I'm here to talk to you about. So let's do that. This is probably the API that you know the best, which I've already mentioned. It's the Google Maps API. It has been used for a variety of really interesting things. It is the map In your Uber app, it is the map in Ushahidi, which is a real-time reporting mechanism for a variety of things, including earthquake relief, violence during elections, police brutality, snow cleanup, a variety of things that can be used with the Ushahidi map. There's also an example in here from Madrid where it was a robbery map. They used the Google API to map where all the robberies in Madrid happened, which frankly, if you look at the map, looks like everywhere in Madrid. But you can also use it to map your run and do other cool stuff. So this is an API that you're using all the time, whether you think about it or not. And a lot of the other apps that you use are also using this API. I think APIs are pretty awesome because fundamentally what they are is a kind of library and card catalog all at once. And if you remember card catalogs, then you are as old as me, so thank you for attending. But the idea is that it is both a library of assets that can be used and also a set of rules and protocols on how to use them. And this enables two pieces of software to talk to each other and do interesting things together. So this is not a blank check. It's not keys to the Porsche. But you can establish some workflows. You can establish some rule sets. You can create some boundaries that you're comfortable with while still allowing other people to do something interesting. The best example I've ever seen is still this, or best description is still this. This is from Best Buy. So I'll take a minute for it. So, I mean, there's a variety of other examples that they give in there, and it's a really good analogy for it. So if you ever need to explain APIs, use the deck of cards metaphor. But the interesting thing about that explanation is that a lot of what's happening in terms of brands and how they've reacted to this kind of participatory world where people can remix and mash up and create things of their own is that it makes brands feel like they're really quite out of control. that all of a sudden the desire that they had and the ability that they had to push messages out there and create their own stuff and you just passively received it, that's over. And that scares the hell out of a lot of brand managers. But there are some really good ways that brands should be using APIs, and I'm going to talk about 4 of them. The first one is actually to learn about your customers. This is a little bit different than surveilling them, ideally, but it unfortunately goes through some of the same steps. It allows you to kind of identify who those customers are and track them through a workflow in order to see what they're actually doing with the API and with the other apps that are in there. We'll talk about an example of that. It's an opportunity to expand the way that you contract or the number of touch points within which you contract with your customers. So there may be other ways that they transact with you or interact with you and other places. You could actually hit them where they are as opposed to sucking them into your own experience. There's also a huge opportunity to open up the value chain for brands using APIs. And then finally, to transform behavior ultimately to the user's benefit. I say to the user's benefit because I think there are a lot of brands desperately trying to get people to change behavior for the brand's benefit. But we'll come to that in a moment. So one example that I like about this is a case study from Made by Many in London, who built Skype in the classroom. And they use Skype's single sign-on, which is your login for Skype, right? So once you log in to Skype in the classroom, what they can see, at least in theory, is whether or not they're tracking it is another matter. But what they can see is not only how many teachers are using the education service Skype in the classroom, but also whether or not those teachers are also paying customers of eBay on the regular platform, what type of account they have, what their likelihood to convert to a paid account might be, their propensity, in other words, to use other services that Skype has to offer, which means that they can actually start anticipating other needs for this particular subset of their users and continue to build something of value for them. That's the theory. The other example of this is part of the Best Buy Open API program. They partnered with eBay a few years ago and basically allowed eBay shoppers who are doing last-minute shopping for Christmas and the holidays to find something that they could buy now through Best Buy and have it fulfilled in time for Christmas. And so they just married up basically the database of inventory that Best Buy had and the fulfillment and shipping systems and payment systems so that you could complete that whole transaction on the eBay site without having to go somewhere else to complete the process. Another great example of this is actually Amazon, who, in addition to selling you books and ebooks and various things for your home and DVDs and everything else, also has built a whole system in order to support that. So in order to have the capacity to serve you all of the products that you buy from Amazon, they had to build enormous data farms and server farms, and they rent seek on that capacity, that excess capacity, by renting it to other people, a lot of them startups, many of them not even startups. Netflix uses Amazon servers for certain things, in order to continue to sort of derive revenue and value from that. So they opened up all of those back-end systems of fulfillment, payments, hosting, analytics, and just the inventory systems that they have built for other people to use in their own businesses. And then you also have this fourth pillar, which is this idea of transforming behavior. So the last session that I was just in was about the Internet of Things and wearables. We're talking a lot about transforming behavior in these conversations. There are now more and more wearables that are locking into other APIs like your Nest or your Withings scale or your other programs in order to keep track of your general health and activities. And there is one more thing, which is being able to disrupt market sectors. So Twilio is a telephony API that allows various startups and companies to basically build SMS and voice-based messaging systems on top of it. Uber uses it, Airbnb uses it, OpenTable uses it. It's actually really amazing what this thing can do, but it has completely changed the way those businesses are. Well, it changes the way that sector operates because these businesses can do things in real time. It also allows you to completely transform processes. If you take that one step further, disrupting a market sector, and apply a totally different way of doing things, which is not just automating the old way, but actually doing things in a new way, then you get what Stuart Eccles from Made by Many calls opinionated software, which is about really saying, we think there is a better or optimal way of doing things. It may not be the way you do them now, and we're going to push you into this new kind of working approach. But some brands actually behave like APIs. And I think that more brands should. So after much struggle, I finally came to a definition of what it means for a brand to behave like an API. And this is my definition. For a brand to act like an API, it has to make available to its users a set of common assets and instructions that they can use to create something of value for themselves. That's the point. They get to use it to create something of value for themselves, not necessarily for the brand. Ideally, this also accrues to the brand's benefit, but not necessarily. The archetypal example of this is Lego. Lego sells you the bricks, they suggest that you build a space shuttle, but then you can smash up the space shuttle later and build anything else you want. The space shuttle kit fits with the pirate ship kit, fits with the home kit, fits with the police city kit, all of it fits together. Arguably, Lego Friends doesn't fit quite as well, but that's a different story. But this is sort of the archetypal example of a brand that functionally is an API. In addition to this, they have released toolkits for people to use Legos for creative thinking and brainstorming in corporate environments and education programs as well, literally being kind of a knowledge API. Ikea, obviously. I built this bench out of refrigerator cabinets for my house. It was very exciting. But it allows you to hack it. And when you search IKEA hacks on the internet, you get 1,000,001 ideas for things that you would never have imagined putting together from IKEA, but allow you to build literally anything that you want. And then we have TED and the TEDx franchise, taking TED's values and transporting it around the world by basically saying, here are the basic rules of how to put a TED event on, go. And so within the first year, something like 250 TED events happened. That's a phenomenal spread of ideas for a company whose mission is ideas that spread. And then this is an example from a client that I've worked with, Silverado Senior Living, which believes in operationalizing their culture. So they believe they take care of people who have Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. They have a set of beliefs and practices. They are on the leading edge of treating and dealing with people who have these conditions. And they have built a set of operational rules for how their residences, hospice care, and at-home nursing works. It's non-negotiable. You will have pets in the facility. Children may stay overnight. Families can come and dine with them. But they have thought through every element of the experience so that these people who, prior to this moment, were successful adults can still feel like successful adults. This plate is chosen deliberately because the stripes around the edge help people who have some depth perception issues and vision issues see the edge of the plate and not embarrass themselves or frankly starve themselves by pushing the food off the plate and then not being able to find it again. This is the level of detail that they've gone into. Every Silverado facility has these plates. That said, there's still a lot of flexibility. In Texas, many of the residents are farmers, so they allow the residents there to farm. In San Luis Obispo, there's a completely different set of people who are there, some of whom are used to being able to go and do their own shopping, so they built their own little store inside the residence with funny money that the residence gets to use in order to buy gifts for each other. It's very sweet. So what does this mean with you? I want to leave you with sort of 4 quick ideas. What if more brands embrace this ethos? I think the first thing is you would need to start with small experiments. APIs are complicated things. If you are not, elbow deep in them all the time, don't dive in right away. If this, then that is a great place to start with these kinds of experiments, just seeing if I plug this thing together with this thing, what does it do? It can be a really good place to start to come up with great ideas. Another thing to do is study good examples. There are some brands who are doing this pretty well and starting to kind of lead the charge here. American Express, which should be suffering from legacy technology problems, is actually leading the way, doing all kinds of things. You can scan your receipts with the mobile app, and it will connect that to your actual statement so that you can file your expense report. It's got Apple Pay on the watch and the phone. You can see your offers and everything else on the mobile device. You can sync it up with Foursquare and Twitter in order to get cash back. And obviously this Up4 band, I can also use it to do payments. They're kind of all over it. They're also now doing their own version of Express Checkout, kind of like Amazon payments, but it's American Express payments. And that just launched. They're constantly innovating and partnering with companies to use their APIs to develop new and more interesting tools for their members. Another good example is Nike, in particular on the women's side, amazingly enough, which is the Nike Women business. This is their Instagram feed. You can shop from the photos. This is the Nike Training Club app that takes women seriously as athletes and is kind of amazing. I'm personally working with a trainer in order to get in good enough shape to use the Nike Training Club app. They have the Nike Plus Fuel Lab, where they're working with startups to develop new tools, and obviously the other Nike Run apps. In the end, what I'd like you to think about is thinking about marketing as a service, as opposed to just a push of messages. And what I like to go back to is this ad for Sunkist oranges that ran in the 1920s. It was a revolutionary idea to drink orange juice at this point in time. So this ad says to you, hey, we want you, obviously, as Sunkist, to buy more oranges. That's our business model. The way we get you to do that is we get you to drink orange juice. We tell you that orange juice is really good for you and you'll be a great wife and mother if you serve it, but you've never done this before. So send us 10 cents and we will send you this juicer that is Sunkist branded. And you will be able to make all the orange juice you can possibly stand. And this was actually a moment where they were teaching you something new, giving you a new product, showing you how to use it, and enabling you to make it yourself. That kind of ethos is ultimately what I'm talking about when I talk about brands behaving like APIs. But there are a few hitches. You do still have to think like a smart founder. The business model canvas is a useful tool for this, but ultimately you have to ask yourself, do you have product founder fit? Should you be building this? Are you the right people to do this work? Should you build it or should you buy it? What commitments are you going to have to make? What sacrifices are you going to have to make? And how will you measure success? And if you have good answers to those things, then by all means, get into the API business. Thanks very much.